So the day before, I was in Lake, Kansas, enjoying a really strong HP or high precipitation supercell that produced crazy blue skies, a couple tornadoes, and big hail the size of baseballs. Then I wound up driving to Dodge City that night in Kansas and crashing there overnight. And we had tornado sirens, we had strong winds come in. It was a pretty crazy overnight period. That was kind of the appetizer round for severe weather, meaning the next day would be an even busier day, but we didn't know exactly where. I thought everything would gel along an outflow boundary, the leading edge of cool air exhaust from the previous day's storms, but we didn't know where that would set up. And I was sure that hotel I was in was haunted. There were shattered windows, there were like creepy figures in the middle of the night. It was a weird hotel. I got like 2 hours of sleep. Woke up the next morning, the storms had all passed, crystal clear blue skies, but I knew there would be more severe weather that day. And so I got up, wrote a couple articles for the Washington Post, I did a couple radio hits for the local NPR affiliate, and then I just started driving south and east to Oklahoma City. It took me about 5 hours to get there. Then I reevaluated and decided to go back towards Marietta, Oklahoma, right near the Red River, and kind of wait there for a little while. From there, I looked at current surface observations and I pinpointed the outflow boundary, that little subtle wind shift, to near Wichita Falls, because there were a couple cumulus clouds, little puffy clouds south of that boundary in the warm, moist air, nothing really north. So I drove another 2.5 hours to Wichita Falls. Then I finally got there, blue skies, and I just waited. So the best thing I did, I parked, I bought myself an ice cream cone at Brahms, and then noticed a couple little clouds going up, and that's when I saw cumulus clouds really roiling and forming and starting to tower. In the course of like 15 minutes, this thing went from a tiny cumulus cloud, kind of puffy like a cotton ball, to this massive 40,000-foot storm. There were lightning bolts shooting out the side of it, and it wasn't supposed to be a crazy busy day. And I looked at the radar map, this was the only storm going, and I started thinking, you know, this might take into all the energy of the environment. This might not have competition. What struck me as most impressive was seeing the updraft rapidly organize. You had a rain-free base, meaning air was going in, and all that upward moving air would be enough to maybe help this storm to start to rotate, and that's exactly what happened. You had hail falling already only a few minutes into the storm. You had this crazy orange glow beneath the storm, and I realized this thing meant business. So I pull out my MyRadar app, I look, I see the storm really starting to hook, so it's showing spin on radar, and visually this entire updraft, the size of Mount Everest, was starting to rotate like a top. It had these two arms that was kind of pulling in. It reminded me of that ice skater, the figure skater, spinning and getting narrower and really contracting, and that's when I knew this thing could produce a tornado. So this thing's spinning, I'm not even underneath the storm, and yet I'm near it, and hail is shooting out the side. That's how strong this centrifuging updraft was. And it wasn't big hail yet, but that's when the storm really took off. I drove south near the Red River and just watched this massive mothership supercell all come together, tornado sirens blaring the town of Burkburnett, and this thing looked like an alien spacecraft. It was so weird to be underneath this like stacked pancake hockey puck thing that was just spinning. You know, you never really think about the entire sky spinning above you, and yet that's exactly how this was. I saw inflow on the side like this conveyor belt of little tiny puffy clouds feeding into this massive rotating storm, and these scuddy tendrils below where the storm was starting to kick up dust, and apparently that was an EF0 tornado. So I took all these pictures. It was the best storm I had ever seen to that point, but I saw more storms going up to the south, and it was a tough call. I figured farther south, better inflow, more instability, juice to the south where it was warm. So I went down there, and I very quickly encountered hail the size of baseballs near Bellevue, and then I saw this wall cloud, and apparently this had already put down a tornado, an EF1 or EF2, but I missed it. I was so mad at myself. So I go to this farmhouse, and yes, I had the cage built over my truck, but I didn't want to break any of the side glass. So a friendly farmhand said, yeah, you can stay here for a little while, park under our tree. They all ran to their storm shelter with their family and kids, and the leaves were just getting shredded from trees. It was wild, like baseballs coming down, shattering on impact. You saw these shards of ice ricocheting out from the pavement. It was crazy to see. And these things were like lemon-shaped and had all these spikes. So I drive south of this hail and I see this perfect rotating wall cloud spins right over me, and it just didn't produce a tornado. And that's when I was like, okay, I'm done for the day. It's 8 o'clock at night, the sun's going down, things are kind of gusting out, like I'm probably done. And as I'm watching this dying storm push through, seeing the wall cloud kind of spinning away and really getting shredded, I noticed to my west, to the left, like underneath this sunset, there's this weird low-hanging cloud, and it looked like a textbook wall cloud. Like it was halfway, almost 3/4 of the way down to the ground. it looked ominous, but it looked really out of place because on radar, I didn't see any other storms. Like there was nothing else going on. There was just this one weird hanging thing. That would prove integral to the forecast later on, and I wish, looking back on it, I had paid a little more attention. So I figure it's time to call it for the night. I'm like 2.5 hours from Dallas. I figure I'll go to Gainesville, which is in northern Texas, right off Interstate 35, a good place to kind of chill overnight. So I start driving east, and as I do so, I see more lightning flashing behind me. So apparently all these storms had started to merge, and ordinarily when you get a squall line, you're not talking a big tornado risk. It's more damaging winds, straight line winds. And yet this thing seemed to have a couple embedded circulations. So between lightning strikes, I see this rugged, low-hanging cloud, and then all of a sudden my phone buzzes and I'm pulled over to the side of the road, and I get this tornado warning. I'm like, huh, is that actually spinning? And then with that, my phone buzzes again, and I get a second tornado warning. And then it buzzes again with the emergency alert system. And apparently, we had 3 circulations all suddenly lining up in this squall line of storms, which really rarely happens. And that's when I started thinking, you know, I'm not chasing these storms. These storms are chasing me. So now I'm kind of in get out of Dodge mode because there are these 3 circulations all heading east. There's one road for me. Like I can't go north or south. It's just follow this one road into the town of Bowie. And I could either do that or I could risk being out on these open roads with no cell service and with utility poles. And I knew that in addition to these 3 circulations, which may or may not be producing tornadoes, there'd be straight line wind too. So it's kind of between a rock and a hard place. So I said, you know what, I'll go to Bowie, I'll hunker down there, there'll be people nearby. Let's hope the middle circulation, which was the one kind of aiming towards me, let's hope it doesn't pan out, because most of the time it doesn't. But the atmosphere had other plans. So I pull into Bowie, the lightning's flashing, the rain's coming down, tornado sirens are blaring, and I made this quick video just saying, hey, here's what's going on. And the wind's coming through like gusts of 30, 40 miles an hour. It's rough. And then all of a sudden, the rain stops. So I'm like, okay, backside of the storms. And I look at radar, and the circulation has passed. So now I think, you know what, I'm good, let's go. And it turns out, because I was so far from the radar, the circulation at the surface hadn't arrived yet. So I drive north, all of a sudden sheets of rain coming down, and I notice these green flashes, like these power flashes in the distance, and then the power goes dead. And that's when things got pretty eerie. Suddenly visibility goes to near zero, the power in town goes out, I can't see anything. I think I'm driving like 40 miles per hour. I'm going like 3 and I can barely see. Windshield wipers on full blast. And then leaves start coming down from the sky. That's an unsettling feeling because you're used to leaves like flying down along the ground. But when stuff is coming down, you know something had to lift it up. And I started thinking like the power flashes, that was something was destroying utility equipment down the road. And then the fog just hits all at once, like thicker than I've ever seen. And I realized there's a funnel nearby. This is low pressure from a tornado condensing the moisture in the air. And that's when the winds just hit all at once. So now I realize this is not a good situation. We're getting winds 60, 70, 80 miles per hour. I can barely see outside. I pull into a nearby, like one of those car washing places with the individual wells, and I can barely see anything, and other people are parked in there too. The wind is just howling at me, and so I figure, you know what, there's gonna be debris flying by. I need to get to a safe shelter, and the only shelter was in the lee of a retaining wall. So to get out there, I had to get out of my vehicle, but to do that, like I had to brace myself against the wind. The door wouldn't open, the wind was too strong. So I got kind of a pushing start. It wouldn't work. And finally, I pressed my legs against one side of the car, pushed out, managed to slip out, and I grabbed my video camera with me. And that's when the full force of the tornado hit. We got winds gusting 80 to 100 miles per hour, debris flying past my truck. I was hunkering down in the lee of a brick wall, and I knew that I was in an okay spot there because winds were coming out of the north. But if they switched, I wanted a backup plan, so I was ready to duck around. And the roar was intense. It was like the freight train, but it sounded like I was in an airplane sticking my head out the windshield. It was the loudest rush of wind I've ever heard, louder than the tornado sirens, and eventually like power everywhere is out, you can't hear anything, and you just see stuff blowing by. Like it was, you were in a tornado. And I started thinking right then, like, I'm in a tornado. So of course I had to document it. I knew exactly what was going on. I was in a QLCS, a little kink in the line tornado that had spun up along this line of thunderstorms. I don't remember if my ears popped, but I know that it was a surreal experience to be in this little pocket of calm air and a maelstrom of absolute atmospheric fury surrounding me. Everything was screaming. It was like the wind was sentient. It was screaming at me. And it was weird in the moment because you realize that even if you're a scientist, you're at the mercy of these things. You feel so incredibly small as the atmosphere is just raging around you. You're like in the middle of a whirlpool of wind that's gushing past almost as fast as a jet airliner when it takes off. And it sounded like a jet airplane getting ready to run down the runway. It was incredible. It only lasted about 30, 45 seconds, if that, but the damage was intense. There were trees down everywhere, homes without roofs. We had damage to a hotel nearby, flash flooding in a matter of 15, 20 minutes, road signs down, and I couldn't believe that just moments prior, I had been underneath that tree, underneath the place where telephone poles came down, and I was very fortunate to have made the decisions I made and to have recognized what was happening as it was happening and gotten to a safe place. But I think really it goes to show you, no matter how much you think you know about the atmosphere, you are still, you're not in charge. The atmosphere is. Sometimes you're the chaser and sometimes you get chased. And I think that being in the middle of everything made me a better meteorologist because I can empathize with people who go through these things more. You know, I'm talking to viewers at home when I'm on TV about what to do in the event of a tornado. If they're getting these environmental cues, what does it look like? What does it sound like? What are they seeing and experiencing? Those are things that if I can understand as a human, I can better communicate as a scientist.
Follow MyRadar on social media: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Download MyRadar on iOS, Android, Amazon Alexa, Xbox, and Windows.